This is Mike Whiteside, and you're listening to Tobin Tonight.
Were you born and raised in Toronto?
Just outside of Toronto, so it's kind of that old cliche. Whenever you go on vacation, someone's like, where are you from? Everybody's basically an hour from Toronto, unless you're a true city kid. But I grew up about a half hour outside of Toronto, a little town. Well, not a little town anymore, but a town called Ajax.
Oh, okay. See, when you first said little town, I was just like, oh, it's probably gonna be like somewhere in like buttfuck nowhere. I did not know where it is.
No.
When you say Ajax, I'm like, I know some people I went to school with that are from Ajax, and if I show them like, hey, there's this guy who said you're a small town, I'd be like, excuse me, we're not small, and I'd be like, well, take it up with Mike.
Yeah, I live in Port Perry now, which is a small town, and I love it up here. It's a little bit slower. I found Ajax was getting pretty big.
I feel like that is how I feel with certain parts of Ottawa, where I know it's different when people say like GTA, the Greater Toronto Area, but I read at some point, because we lived in Orleans for a bit when I was at Carleton, and someone was like, oh, you live in like the Greater Ontario area, and I'm like, don't try to make that a thing. I'm like, it's just Orleans. It's outside of Ottawa.
Yeah,
I'm comfortable with that. But like if someone's like, oh, you live in like the GOA, I'd be like, no, I don't. I live in Orleans, thank you. But
I spent quite a bit of time up there. I played hockey in university, so we were up playing Carleton and University of Ottawa there quite a bit.
So how was the team back then? Or were they like a monster team, or were they just kind of like they're subpar?
When I played them, they were actually pretty good. They were a little bit better than U of Ottawa at the time, I believe. And I'm trying to think of when I played them. I'm actually pretty certain they went on and maybe we got to the finals. I can't remember, but they had a pretty good team. I remember that.
Okay. Do you remember like what year roughly, or like what years?
I graduated in 2016.
Okay.
So it would have been like 2012 to 2016.
Okay. 2012, 2016. Okay. So I actually would have been, 2012, 2016. I probably would have just started actually in 2012.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I haven't got like, I was never into actually going to see their games, but that would have been interesting if I had to go see a game. Like, what's the deal with this Mike guy? Like, why is he always like, and then it's like, you realize, and like, if someone was like, be like podcast, past, future, present, I'd be like, the present be like, yeah, why is he such an asshole? And then like the future is just like, now easy, he's gonna like become a singer, and then he's gonna be on your show, and I'd be like, shut up, future. And then it happens, and you're like, oh god.
Totally.
But I think that's interesting because, you know, when I actually was at Carleton, like obviously basketball was a big thing for them, and then I think it was like maybe I don't know how well it's expanded, but I think it was like my second or last year they started doing, I think it's called like the Centennial Classic or the Battle of like the City. So they, so it was like University of Ottawa's hockey team versus Carleton's at like TD Place.
Yeah.
And I said like, it was the first year and I don't know who won, but I was like, all right, like I'm hoping this comes to a place where the same way they treat the basketball, where it's like Carleton versus U Ottawa basketball or any other sport. It was just kind of chaos. Like they have the Panda game, and that's crazy. And I've never been a part of like anything like that before. But I think it's interesting because you don't need to go to the Panda game to know who won. If you just go on Bank Street afterwards, you see either people in red that are celebrating. And I'm like, okay, Carleton won. Or you see the other team that I guess University of Ottawa has like a kind of a maroon. Yeah. And then if you see people in maroon celebrating, you're like, oh, I guess we lost. And it's like, yeah. Now, of course, with your song that came out in February, you had another song, 3 a.m. Yep. I like that one, even though it's funny because when I first think of 3 a.m., I think Matchbox 20. But then when you came out with 3 a.m., I'm like, okay, that's two 3 a.m. songs that if someone has a gun to my head and be like, I want you to name two songs with the same title, I'd be like, oh, that's easy. Matchbox 20, 3 a.m. and Mike Whiteside, like 3 a.m. And then they'd be like, I'd have never heard that second one. And then when I go to heaven, I'd be like, damn it, Mike. But I think I like both, but I want to ask you, having this new song out, like tell me a little bit more about it in terms of how the process came to be, who you worked with, and just the timing of it. Because I know some artists probably had music from like pandemic and they're like, I'm not releasing this yet. Some people had songs that they wrote in the pandemic and they didn't think they were going to be able to write in the pandemic, and they did. But tell me a little bit more about this song, like its title and how it came to be.
Yeah. Well, it can be a very loaded question because there is, as you said, the process that kind of opens it up into a bunch of different ways. But starting with 3 a.m., kind of where I began in music was I'd started writing again. And I always say it started back at a Kenny Chesney concert back in 2018. And I was there with my ex and her family, and they were always very musical and had always encouraged me to keep that passion alive. And with hockey playing in university, I'd kind of let that not go to the wayside, but hockey was always my focus and getting my degree and stuff like that. I never imagined, putting my own songs out there. And so I always say kind of a blessing in disguise. When we had broken up, it allowed me to get back to my true passion, which was music. And I just kind of started looking around and started writing my own songs and started looking for producers and stuff like that. And that's kind of how I came across Mark Schroer and Eric Fintelman, and they were my producers on 3 a.m. So I had started talking to Mark, and Mark had been like, hey, listen, we're managing. And at the time, Robin wasn't signed with Warner or anything like that. And she's like, hey, listen, we're managing this girl, Robin. She's kick ass. And, she has a ton of songs that I think might fit your vibe and maybe what you're looking for. Why don't I shoot some your way? And so I was like, yeah, sure. Cool. So he did that. And one of the songs in the pile was 3 a.m. And just going through a breakup myself earlier in the year and, kind of taking a look at some of the songs that she had sent me, it really fit well with what I was going through at the time and what I thought other people might relate to. And I liked the song. It was good. And I wanted to work with Mark and Eric. So that's how that first song really kind of came to be. It was a process of a few months, me going back and forth with Mark, and then finally settling on that song and getting into studio.
Now, when you mentioned Robin
Ottolini,
we've actually had, I was going to mention, we've actually had Robin on an episode, and you know what? It's kind of interesting to see how far she has come. But I again, sometimes when I'm doing the interviews or chatting with people, I'm like, okay, you mention a name or you name drop and you're like, all right, never heard that person before. And then 3 years later, you're like, oh, same person. Okay. It's interesting. Cause I see sometimes on Facebook or even on Instagram, when you post something, I noticed on yours, for example, Parker Gray likes stuff, Lydia likes stuff.
Yep.
I think it's Olivia Rose, Paige, I think. And I'm just funny because I know these people now, but 2 or 3 years ago, I would not have a clue. I would just be like, oh yeah, some person named Parker likes these stuff. Okay. It's what does she do? Oh, she's also a singer. Okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's kind of funny how the window or the circle of, I guess, I think it's the 10 degrees of separation or whatever it's called. You find that afterwards, but sometimes that can be helpful. And sometimes you're kind of really, this person too? Oh, God, how do you find that person? It's oh, I think he's a total douche. It's so same here. I can't believe we're best friends now. I want to ask you, of course, now, with the 3 a.m. song, I've listened to it and I said I've enjoyed it. I really like your other song as well. But I want to ask you a little bit to talk about that as well, because when I first listened to it, judging by the title, and again, I'm one of those people that relates a song to another song. So at first I was thinking oh, there's definitely a song by another country artist out there that has Paradise in it. I'm sure there's many, but I was thinking one of back in the 90s. Now it's blanking on my name or blanking right now, but I think he toured with Lone Star and sometimes they do Christmas stuff. And I was just oh, that kind of reminds me of this song. And then when I listened to yours, I was all right, I like it because it just, and not to, obviously it's a compliment, but some people will just be why did you say that? It just sounds like the kind of old school kind of country. I don't hear, let's put it in, I like these bands too, but I don't hear the Florida Georgia Line element or a Luke Bryant element where it's almost hey, I got to try to make this a little bit poppy. I'm what's wrong with it just being country?
Yeah.
Right. So I like that. But explain that one to me as well. Cause I think this is where the Lydia part comes in as well, that you worked with her on this.
And so we'll keep it to that, however many degrees of separation. But through it's sick and twisted how everybody's connected. But literally, when I cut that song written by Robin, that was when I first started co-writing. So my first couple songs that I had co-written, 3M I didn't write, Robin wrote. So once I finally started writing, my first two songs that I wrote with were with Robin. And I was just like, okay, like this is the writing thing. This is the co-writing thing. Like maybe I'll try some more of it.
Yeah.
And so I'd seen she was writing with Lydia, and me, the guy that I am, I just reach out. So I was just like, hey, I see you're writing with my friend Robin. We should write sometime. And that's kind of how it began. And then you said names like Parker and Paige and stuff like that. It's the exact same way. It started writing with all these people, but throughout the last couple years through COVID, which it did allow me to write a lot and get better. And, through the whole process of co-writing, I think you pick up, if you're writing with good writers, which I'm fortunate enough to be able to do, you really get better quicker is the best way to put it. And so basically every song that I'm putting out, Lydia is a co-writer on. She's one of my best friends. We were just in Calgary last week because I was out there recording another song. So the song, My Kind of Paradise, was a co-write with her, our friend Aaron Pollock, and then our other friend, Rich Cloak. And every time we got into a session together, we were able to come up with something great. So it was just one of those songs where I felt good about it. And I liked it. To me, it was catchy. Every time I listened to the chorus, I was like, okay, I really like this. Like I listened to the second time I hear the chorus hit, I'm like, okay, I really like this. I think I want to cut this. And yeah, kind of a long-winded answer there, I know, but that's how I got to start writing with them and know all these people, and then put out my first song that I was a writer on, which was kind of cool.
I think it's interesting because when we were talking to Parker about this, and I think Greg Ryder had mentioned it as well, like sometimes when you have, I guess it's like these writing sessions or Zoom sessions because of the pandemic, like you're kind of going into it and going like, okay, some people go in and go, where do we go from here? Like, what are we writing about? And then I think now I've spoken to Parker, and you can attest to this or not, but like I find she's a very laid back, very honest person. Like it's like there's not really much of a filter. And that's what I kind of find interesting, because it's like, I think Greg had mentioned in his kind of conversation that he's like, I didn't know what to think when we were doing these things. And she's like, all right, like, like I'm kind of sad. Are you sad? And he's like, yeah, I'm kind of sad. And it's like, they just went and talked, and there was like no really writing session, like, I guess, work in mind. It wasn't like thought out or planned out. And then through that, he kind of released Northern Lights. And I was like, oh, that's like the best way to do things, because if you kind of come in with a plan, yeah, it's helpful. But sometimes it's just like two people just trying to figure out, like pick each other's brain and be like, all right, what do you think of this? Mm-hmm. Oh, you like that? Yeah, same here. Now, how do we, I don't like this part of it. Can we work on that? And it's like, all right, cool. But it's all sometimes about networking and figuring things out. Like, but I just thought it was interesting because when you mentioned these people that you're working with, sometimes down the road, if you come out with like, if you're on stage and you bring them up on stage, it's all about sometimes exposure too. So I think it goes a long way of networking, but it's something that I realized when you're older, that you look at it sometimes, you're like, oh, I don't want to network with that person. And that person becomes a little bit more like they're doing the same thing you are, and it's going to be helpful down the road. But because you didn't network them at the beginning, it's kind of tougher now.
Totally. I can, see that. And even in just a short time, being in this industry, obviously you can see, everybody can blow up quite quick. So
yeah,
for me, it's always just been about, I'm always going to be myself. And we talk about like not having a filter. Is I am who I am, and I just try to be a good person. And at the end of the day, that's all you can really do.
The other thing I want to mention too, because I know, kind of going back to your previous answer where you mentioned about like getting back into music and it kind of being a blessing in disguise, breaking up with your ex, like I want you to kind of rank that. Like, was it hockey one, then your girlfriend, then music, and then somehow where you broke up with her, it was like, all right, now I can focus on two things. I can focus on my hockey and my music career. I can only focus on two things. Give me a third thing I can't focus.
No, I just think that timing wise, things happen the way that they're supposed to happen. And I don't think it had anything to do with, being in a relationship with my ex or not. It was just one of those things where, being at that concert, they looked at me and said, hey, like, you could be doing this. This should be you up on stage. And it just always, it resonated with me and it sat with me. And it was just something where I was like, you know what, if I'd be happy at the end of my life, looking back, whatever happens from this, if I at least tried it, regardless of how successful I am versus not, it doesn't matter, because at least I went out and I tried something and did something I love. And that's all I really, want to do. Is I would look back, I guess, let's call it 50, 60 years from now, and be like, you know what? I don't have any regrets.
When you were making this transition, because obviously you went to school, you're playing hockey, you went and did you finish to get your degree?
Yeah. So I went into financial planning for, I guess, 3 years. Like it was a complete 180.
Yeah, because I wanted to ask you, like, when mentioning all this, because like I know I went to Carleton to do communications, and I came out with communications, but like in my mind, I wanted to be in media. I wanted to be like either in sports media, radio, something like that. You could be entertaining, but still be factual. But I don't find like what I'm doing now with podcasting to be that far from what I went to school for.
Totally.
But if someone came up to me one day and said, Brian, like, because I like comedy, I like doing stand-up comedy too. But if someone said, Brian, throw your degree away and we're going to start with stand-up comedy, I'm like, oh my God, I just feel like I just wasted 4 years because I just went 4 years to try to be a broadcaster. And now you're telling me go to comedy, where it's like, all right, it's kind of like I wasted 4 years, but you take elements from maybe communications and be like, all right, like, I learned how to either work a crowd, or you figured out like, okay, how do I write things? And I feel like that can be helpful. But like when you basically did this 180 to go right into music, were there ever moments where you kind of sat down and were like, what am I doing? Or was it just kind of like, all right, this is my passion. Whatever happens, happens. It might be scary, but at least I can look back after and say, I did give it an honest shot.
Yeah, I mean, there's no fear for me at all in terms of that. I look even at my degree, and I went to school for business, and a lot of those skills that I learned, mind you, going to school is one thing, actually doing it is another thing. But there are a lot of little things I would say I picked up from going to school that I have now translated into building this business up, because at the end of the day, that's what it is. It is a business, and you're looking to scale that. And I think there's a lot of important factors that school taught me, that even though it is the music business, it is still a business.
Okay. So like when you mention that, if you don't mind me asking, like what kind of things did you take over from that? Like, cause I mean, I'm not trying to put you on the spot. It's just that I find it interesting. Cause like when you find people that go in the music side of the field and they come from a different background, it's like, all right, like what did you take that transitions into the music side?
Totally. Yeah. So I think a lot of it is like taking a look at where to allocate your capital. Whatever your top line revenue is, where is that being put into so that you can leverage that and continue to grow and continue to scale? Because at the end of the day, it's all good and well for it to be a passion, but you still want to make money doing it as well. So being able to take $1 and turn it into 5 or 10, that's kind of my main thought process behind a lot of the stuff that I do. And maybe not splurging on certain areas that I don't think will get as much of a return, or might not be the best decision from a business standpoint, if that makes sense.
No, that's fair. Because I think my follow up there was like, how do you feel essentially on like saying the social media side of things? Like when you see yourself putting things on like Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, like whatever realm you have, like, do you look at that sometimes and say, is it worth it? Is it doing things for you? And like, at what point do you look at something and say, all right, this didn't work, we're cutting this off?
Yeah. So for me, majority of my time is actually spent on TikTok.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. So I've got literally just under 30,000 followers on TikTok. So I don't post as much on Instagram, but they're all kind of connected. So I've tried to do more and more on Instagram, but TikTok is really where I've been able to connect with people the most. I seem to get the most views in terms of organic reach. I'm able to go live and do things like that. So I've been able to connect with people that way. And I haven't even spent any money on TikTok yet.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. So it's something I'll probably dabble in. Don't get me wrong. I think if there's any way to increase the reach even more, but it's just been about consistency and understanding how that platform works in terms of, you just can't think of too much about what you're putting out there. You just have to put it out there. And then I think with every time you post, especially on TikTok, you're getting better and better and better and better, because it's not the where you spend all this time trying to perfect it and then put it out there. It's like you're putting it out there, and each time that you're putting stuff out there, you're getting better. Hopefully that's the goal, right?
Yeah, I feel like mine is the other way around. It's like every time I post something, it's like, why is this guy progressively getting worse? It's like I don't know. Ask him.
I think if you were to look back, you'd probably notice a significant change. And I'm sure it's like one of those things where you start working out and you don't notice a difference. And then you look back a year of consistently working out and eating right and doing all the little things, and you go, oh shit, like I actually look pretty good. I didn't even think of this, because you see yourself every single day, right? So
yeah.
I think it's just one of those things.
Now, when you're saying on TikTok that you gain like an audience organically, like what kind of things do you post on TikTok? Is it like covers your own stuff, or is it just more or less like, hey, this is Mike and I'm eating bread. All right, cool. And people are like, I love how he eats bread.
No, I wish it was that easy. There was stuff at the beginning where I would just kind of try, as you were saying, follow the trends and something that might be trending for a day or whatever it might be. Yeah. And it just wasn't authentic to the message I was getting across, and I didn't see a lot of traction with it. So I just started posting stuff that I was like interested in terms of like my music and stuff like that. So I did a lot of covers, and what would happen is that stuff wouldn't take off, but then you'd find there would be other sorts of videos that might be a little bit more similar that continued to take off. And like, okay, I'm going to stop wasting all my time, taking, as I was saying, that effort into why am I posting covers if they're not getting any views, or I'm not connecting with an audience, and is it really worth it? So it would be even like little clips of new songs and stuff like that. If I had a demo, that sort of stuff. And once music's out, it's just continually finding ways to position that song in a way where there's something interesting that will hook the viewer in and allow them to engage with that. So honestly, maybe you're talking to the wrong guy, because I don't think anybody has it figured out, but I just try new things, and all of it basically revolves around music and acting and stuff like that. And
who were some of the people that you kind of idolized or looked up to that made you want to like pick up a guitar or start singing?
For me, I always relate it back to that Kenny Chesney concert, because what I get out of the music side of it is I love entertaining. And I like the whole idea of a live show. And when I was there, I've seen him a couple times now, and it was just like, I loved the way that he was able to work a crowd and put on a live show. And so that was for me kind of looking up. He was one of the first people I started listening to. Others were like Toby Keith, Montgomery Gentry. Like those were the first artists I started listening to, and kind of their music and their storytelling and stuff like that. But I always relate it back to, Kenny, seeing his concert, and I was just so jacked up, and I was just like, okay, like I love this. Like he's an entertainer, and that's what I go for, is like, okay, how can I entertain the crowd? How can I create moments and stuff like that? And there's been some other acts that I've seen over the years that I'm like, okay, they put on a wicked show. I love that about them. Like Florida Georgia Line was one where I loved. For me, there's always been full circle moments with that. Like the first, obviously that concert, of course. And then I caught a hat at that concert, and I never catch anything. Again, this is so minuscule. I still have this hat. Okay. It's like almost torn to shreds, but I always say that one day I'll be on stage with him. I'll be opening up for him, and I'll wear that hat. But I'm going to get a new one.
It's good to have dreams. It's good to have those kind of memories. Like, I mean, geez, if you can have that, I sometimes look at like CMT Music Awards, or, even when acts come to Canada, and you'll hear like a Kara Isabella story about like Shania Twain, and then you're like, wow, okay. And then they're both on stage. You're like, geez, like, how does that happen? Like you basically held on to something for years, hoping it happens, and then it does. And you're like, all right, good. Makes for a good story.
Yeah. Some of the music that was playing in my household growing up was like James Taylor, Simon and Garfunkel, Neil Diamond, like that sort of stuff. So it was kind of, I think the only reason I got into country music was because I was playing playing rep hockey, and that's what all the guys are listening to. It was a cool thing to do. So I was like, okay, let's give this a listen. And then I just fell in love with it.
I feel like, I feel like there's a part of me that's like, I will now judge hockey players to not be as tough, or just that they are, or be like, all right, you guys go back in that locker room and listen to some Taylor Swift. They're like, we don't listen to Taylor Swift. I'd be like, listen, I talked to Mike. Mike told me you listen to country music, and he's like, well, tell Mike that I'm going to beat him up. I'd be like, I'm sure you will. I was like, no, you won't. Yeah. I always think in my mind, that's because when I played like pickup hockey, and I'll probably get hated on for this, but in our locker room, we were probably just playing I was gonna say Dion Phaneuf. We were probably playing like Nickelback, and people like, you were playing Nickelback. I'm like, dude, I don't care what you say about Nickelback. They had some good pump up songs,
man. Yeah.
Like if anything, if it's like the only, if someone said you can only listen to Nickelback one time in your life or like for one occasion, I'd be like, hockey warm ups. Are you kidding me? Like, we're going out tonight. I'd be like, yeah, we are. Now with the pandemic and COVID, like I feel like we're kind of branching out of that. Like I know it's still there, but I feel like their society's point right now is like, all right, we kept you locked up for like 2 years. Like we're not keeping you locked up for another 2. Just deal with it whatever way you want to. But like, how did you deal with the pandemic? Because I know musicians, I feel like had a tough time in terms of no live concerts. There are people out there that will debate it of saying like they felt guilty to do Instagram lives of being like, hey, I'm still a musician. Can you buy my music? And it's like, wow, way to be selfish. Everyone's suffering. And then there's other people that were like, no, man, like I think the world needs music. How did you go through the whole pandemic?
See, I've always done stuff outside of music as well. Like I have business. So I was probably even busier during the pandemic on top of all of the music stuff that I do. I didn't even really think about it. I was just continuing to do every single day. Truthfully, it allowed me to write a ton of music. So it was, once again, a little bit of a blessing in disguise. It allowed me to kind of take a step back and be like, okay, like let's learn how to write. I always say, turn on the faucet, let some of the brown water come out, and hopefully it gets a little bit more clear. And that's what I was able to do on the songwriting side. And just continue to hone my craft and take my vocal lessons and do all the stuff behind the scenes that if everything was open, I don't know if I would have taken the same approach because I would have been so worried about doing all the live shows and this and that. Yeah. I think for me, COVID just allowed me to kind of get everything behind the scenes done that I needed to do.
Kind of like clear your head, put you in a better, like, yeah, that's fair. I feel like there's like a crossroads with COVID. Like, and I don't think anyone who says that they were less productive during COVID or more productive, like I don't feel like people should go out and attack them for that. I mean, geez, people had to try to keep busy or people wanted to relax. Like I'm looking at it from the standpoint of Luke Combs' answer to COVID would probably be different than say Rob Natalini's. The same as Connor McDavid's answer to COVID would be different than an OHL player's, right? It's like, so I don't think you can fault people for that. Like I know there are definitely people in between though that kind of struggled to figure out like, okay, where do I go? What do you think in the pandemic was like a big takeaway for you or something that you kind of learned, or without the pandemic, you probably wouldn't have thought about it as clearly? I know it's a little bit wordy, but more or less like, hey, if this didn't happen, this would have changed, or I wouldn't have looked at this the same way.
I don't think I would have had, and this is just me looking at the music, I don't think I would have had the same catalog of music that I do today. And I think as who I am as an artist, what I get out of it is writing and singing my own songs, telling my story, being able to transmute that through my live performance. So COVID, I just think allowed me to really, really focus on that. I mean, I was able to play live, but I played once. It was Boots and Hearts, and that was my first live performance ever. So it was kind of one of those things where it was like,
good start.
I always say went from 0 to 100 pretty quick, but that's what I want. That's what I want to do. I want to be on those types of stages, and I want to be performing my own songs and telling my story. And that's what I get out of the music, because I do have other business interests that luckily allow me to facilitate, at least started facilitating the music, and then now build that up so that I can keep putting that money back into it and continuing to grow the music brand and the music business itself.
So how did you find your time at like Boots and Hearts? Because I feel like, to kind of relate this to like a hockey term, in case there are people out there that will relate it the same way I do, it's like Boots and Hearts to me is almost like, now I mean this in no shape or offense to them, but it's almost like this is where you're in the minors, or you're just getting called up in terms of, right, like you're going to have a mainstay. It's almost like an AHL team is always going to have kind of a veteran player that's been around. They're still semi-popular. Like I look at like Tobin, for example. I know this is like a horrible example because Tobin is going to be like, what the fuck are you talking about? I'm still cool. I'm like, I didn't say you weren't Tobin. But like that's your headliner. And then you have the people obviously go to see Tobin, but they're there also to see like the younger talent or people on the rise. Yeah. And that's kind of how I feel like a Boots and Hearts is like, there are names from Boots and Hearts in the prior years that I'm looking at and being like, wait, they were at Boots and Hearts and now look at them now. Because again, it's just a name on the card at like helping their career. And then years later, they could headline it or be right next to the marquee. So I want to ask you, in dealing with Boots and Hearts, like how pumped were you to get that? And what kind of things did you take away from Boots and Hearts that you're like applying now, or even going and being like, all right, we've done this. What's next?
Totally. I loved every bit of the experience. For me, it's funny that you say that, because you've actually take a look back at who's been in the Emerging Artist Showcase. Like the list goes on and on and on and on. You're like, oh crap. Like I didn't even know half these people were even in it before. But for me, it's a good starting point. And I say that kind of how you're saying in the minors and working your way up, what you do gain is the perspective to say, here, you're part of a class that if you take a look back, a lot of people have used this and gone on to do a lot of great things. And you can do the same, but you have to realize it's going to take time and you have to hone your craft and you have to become better in all facets. And I think for me, that was the biggest thing I took out of it. I was able to meet so many people in the industry on the management side, as well as the artists themselves, as well as all the session players, and get a feel for everybody. And that's what I'll continue to take with it, is just, hey, put your head down, work like hell, keep putting out a good product. And eventually, as long as you're building up a business and it's continuing to do well, hey, you know what? You're going to be able to have those conversations down the road that maybe one day you are headlining a show, or you're on a bigger tour, whatever it might be. So it was just, for me, a great experience overall to meet everybody and just see what it does really take.
So like when you're at these festivals, like do you get to, obviously I'm assuming like if you know people obviously through networking, you'll get to interact with them, but like the bigger names or the mainstay draw, like do you ever get a chance to talk to them or like kind of throw ideas at them? Or are you more or less the type of like, hey, I'm here, I'm just going to play my role and we'll see what happens?
It was all kind of a whirlwind for me. So especially like the Boots and Hearts, I was basically drinking from the fire hose, I guess is the best way to put it. Like my producers are both in Brett Kissel's band. They're the MD and drummer and the bassist, sorry. And they were playing on the Saturday night. So it was cool to go back there and then meet with them after their show and chat with them. But in terms of the weekend itself, I don't know if I thought anything. I was just kind of like, okay, here we're going here, and then we're going here, and then we're going to go play, and then we'll get off, and then we'll have a couple beers, and then we'll kind of just enjoy the show. That was kind of, I was just soaking up the experience. I wasn't thinking too much about who I was meeting. I was just trying to be friendly with everybody and introduce myself. And there was a lot of great people there. Like there's definitely friends I'll take with me from the other artists and stuff that were in the Emerging Artist Showcase. It was fantastic, I guess is the best way to put it.
I want to ask you to kind of close it out here. Yep. Do you want to have a fun game of, I call it like random questions?
Sure.
All right. So I have this thing generated here. It's like a random question generator. So it just spits out random stuff. So if there's something you don't like in this, don't blame me. Blame a computer, I guess. The first one it generates here. What is your biggest fear in life?
That's a great question.
Thank you. I wish I could take credit for it, but I can't.
Yeah, I know. We have to give the credit to the random generator. I really think it just goes back to not taking action on something I know I should have in the past, like the whole regret thing. I think not trying something that you might not be great at in the first place, but know deep down that you have to at least try it.
That's fair. That's good. Who is a singer or performer you would like to share the stage with? This one just says who's someone that you'd want to share stage with, but I feel like singer performer adds a little bit of to it.
I think you already know this one. I'm gonna have to go with Kenny.
Kenny? Okay. So if Kenny would just say wasn't available and someone, what would be your backup?
Probably Florida Georgia Line. Love those guys.
Oh, that's good. Imagine if they both came. Imagine if that was like a Boots and Hart, where it's like, we got Kenny, and Florida Georgia Line is night 2, and you're like, oh my god, which night do I want? They'd be like, you don't get to choose. We choose it for you. You'd be like, all right, can I do both?
I was gonna say, can I do both? Exactly.
Can I do both? What is your favorite sports team and why?
I hate to admit it, but it's the Toronto Maple Leafs, and they've caused me a lot of pain throughout my lifetime. But we have hope. Hopefully, there's no heartbreak this year, but my hopes are not super, super high.
I feel like
looking okay so far.
Yeah. You know what? I feel your pain. I'm a Detroit Red Wings fan first, but Toronto second. Yeah. But at the same point, it's almost like I will root for them in the playoffs, knowing that they're just gonna break your heart. But I feel like this year, and it's like a broken record. I feel like this year they can at least make it past the first round. I feel like they'd have a chance at the second, but if they lose in like the conference finals, I would be okay with that, because I'd be like, you went at least farther, and knowing who you probably have to face in the conference finals, it's going to be a tough team. Like, I mean, there's no easy teams anymore, but it's just sad that you're like, Toronto, please, can you figure out just to get past the first round?
Just
like, there's no more excuses. Like, every team has to play a tough team and wins. Why can't you? It's like, well, we're working on it. I'm like, I still can't trust you when you lose to Buffalo and Montreal and, God forbid, Ottawa. Like, you know, come on.
Yeah.
Besides music, what would be something that you would have maybe possibly pursued or felt like you could do well in?
Probably in the real estate field. Something to do with that.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, like mortgages, lending. I've always been in, like, as I said, I started out in financial planning, so kind of have that businessy numbers background.
Okay. Are you saying that we would have seen like commercials like during like a Toronto game where it's like, hey, this is Mike Whiteside. It's like, if you need this done, I'd be like, man, if he's going to do that ad, I want to hear some like, you know, old Western music where it's like, wow, wow. And I'd be like,
just a cheesy commercial. Yeah.
Yeah. But I'd be like, man, I'd be like, is his name actually Mike Whiteside? And they'd be like, yeah, it is. And I'd be like, oh, okay. I was like, I thought that was just a stage name for this performance, but I would have liked it if you at least took out the Whiteside and you would have went with like Mikey Whiteside, and then they'd be like, I get it because it goes with the country background, but you know, it is what it is. The last one I'm going to do for the random question here is, if you had to go anywhere in the world right now, where would it be?
I've never been to the UK, and I've always wanted to go there. So that's probably where I go. Like England, Ireland, Scotland, something like that. Yeah.
I like that answer. I was going to say that my go-to would be like England. I don't know why. Like, I feel like it's just, I don't know if it's just the appeal. Sometimes you look at like the acts and stuff that come out of there, and you're like, man, I just want to go to like UK once just to see the realm of it all. Or I'd probably be the same person that comes back like, don't get it. Don't see the appeal. And they'd be like, how did you not? I'd be like, not a big deal. Yeah, there's an Eiffel Tower in Paris. What a big deal. Okay. We have Paris, Ontario. And they'd be like, not even close. I'd be like, leave me alone. I'm just mad. You mentioned that you were working on new music, or you're going to have new music out. Yeah. What can people kind of expect when they listen to Mike Whiteside? Is it just going to be like, I feel like you should come out with an album called Double Side.
Maybe there will be a double-sided album down the road. You never know. I think they can just expect the same sort of energy that I try to bring with each song, and you know, in terms of the production and stuff like that. Obviously very similar to what we've experienced with like My Kind of Paradise, working with the same producers, and they are phenomenal, so I got to give them a ton of credit. But a lot of the songwriting that goes into it, I'll put it this way, might be something similar, something lovey. I won't give it all away, but something along those lines.
That's going to do it for this episode of Tobin Tonight. Our thanks to Mike Whiteside for coming on to the show. Remember, you can find past, present, and future episodes on TobinTonight.com, Spotify, and iTunes. Follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, and leave a comment or two. For Tobin and myself, this is Jacob saying thank you for listening, and good night.